Hey guys, welcome along to the VRTU Health Podcast. My name is Alex Murphy. I'm joined by Stephen today, and we're going to roll through some habit discussions. So you had some questions we were going to start off with, Stephen?
Yeah, so the first question I wanted to ask was, what makes creating habits and sticking to new behaviours difficult?
Yeah, so this is a time of year, obviously, when people are starting to think about resolutions or have been started on their resolutions for a couple of weeks now and maybe are flaking off. It's a pretty repetitive cycle for people, so that's part of the reason we picked this topic out today. If we're looking at things on like a really broad scope, why do people's behaviors form in certain ways? It's heavily based around emotions, right? So if there's a positive emotion with a certain behavior, that makes people want to do more of that. And if there's a negative emotion associated with a certain behavior, that makes people want to do it less, and it puts barriers up. So that's kind of the initial, like the biggest guiding principle for habit formation is the feelings that come around that, basically.
Okay, and so you're saying that if people are having a positive experience when they're trying to create new habits, then it is more likely to stick. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. So that's one of the biggest things we start with people when they come into our coaching service, and one of the most important questions for me in a consult is, what are the things that you currently enjoy doing? Because a lot of times people will come to us feeling like stuck or like there's some sort of limitation, but they'll probably have some habits or activities that they enjoy currently. So they're the ones that we probably start with, because they're just more likely to kind of keep doing them.
So just trying to build upon those habits that they've already got.
Yeah, so it's a reaffirming belief that every time they do those things, they get positive feelings out of it, and that makes it far more powerful and likely to stick to.
So if people are failing, then I guess we're kind of tying that to them potentially having a less of a positive experience, a more negative experience with it. Would that be right?
In certain cases, yeah, I'm sure there's certain cases where people have had negative experiences maybe in a certain exercise activity, or they've tried diets that have just left them kind of feeling over restricted or really like flat and underfed. So there's some inbuilt kind of protection there against that, where your body is like, we didn't experience anything positive from that, so we're going to do everything we can to kind of make that activity seem unattractive. So like once we get into further discussions and look at kind of some of James Clear's work on habits, he talks about those 4 guiding principles of the 4 inverted principles, basically, of why some habits are easy to stick with and how to make other habits harder. So positive experience and that kind of learned behavior really feeds into it.
Okay, so do you want to get into those 4 principles just now a little bit deeper?
Yeah, sure. So the first one, and I was speaking to someone about this last night in their initial session. So the way that these habits can be inverted, it's probably easiest to do it through an example, but the first one is making something obvious. So if you want to take up an exercise habit like running, walking more, you have to make it obvious. So you have to be able to put it into a place where you're not going to forget about it. And then in the second instance, on the inverted side of that, where certain habit, like let's take food for example. So the one we talked about last night with a client is when they keep biscuits in their house, those things are like visible in a basket right in front of them the whole time, and that just makes it seem on a really subconscious level like, oh, triggered, I can see the food that I know is going to give me a nice positive feeling from eating it. So it's in clear sight, which just makes it easier to go for. So if we think about people wanting to start a running habit, maybe leaving their shoes by the door just so they know, okay, I've got to remind myself to run today. That would probably be the first habit.
And I guess that works both ways, like you said, that if you're trying to avoid a certain behaviour or a certain trigger like biscuits, if there's biscuits in the house, you're more likely to eat them, but if there's not, then you're not necessarily going to have that urge to do that. So it works both ways. That's really clever.
Totally. So that's one of the easiest things you can do is basically place barriers between you and a habit that you want to avoid, right? So like it could be anything: smoking, drinking, eating foods that you maybe want to eat less of for your weight loss goals or whatever. The simplest thing is just maybe like not keeping them in the house. Not to say you don't have to have them. If you don't keep them in the house, you've set a barrier between yourself and that habit. You have to put your clothes on, put your shoes on, leave the house, go out and get that stuff. And that for people is sometimes just enough to kind of put a block between those habits and make it easier to stick to.
Sure. And then I guess it's in the opposite side, it's removing barriers then if you're trying to build
Exactly.
another habit,
Yeah, exactly.
making things easier for yourself.
Sure.
So that was the first principle.
Yeah.
What was the second one?
So the second one is making it attractive.
Okay.
So again, this is a flip side of things, is kind of building imagery around things to make it seem attractive or seem rewarding in some way. So we talked about, to start with, how emotions really feed into people's behaviors. And if there's a positive emotion on the other side of a behavior, then there's a reward on the other side of that behavior. So if you feel better, happier, in a more energetic state after a run, you know that you just have to do that run to get into that reward system and tap into that. And you know, if you listen to people like Andrew Huberman, it's extremely powerful the way that feedback loop forms, right? So you'll see that in the same case with diet and nutrition. If you're feeling low, stressed, bored, often the common triggers for nutrition problems, you'll find that when you go to cure those nutrition problems with some sweet foods or something, there's a pleasant feeling associated with that, and you've solved that feeling that you had. So you've solved it, and that's fed back to you that, okay, this is the behavior that we need to do to solve this negative behavior in the first place. So going into principle number 2 is kind of building some imagery around things to make it seem attractive. If it doesn't seem attractive to you to go for a run, how can you kind of build a reward system into the pathway of that, so that on the other side of a run there's something positive, so it feels more attractive to you to go and do that thing.
I feel like off the top of my head, that instantly makes me realise a little bit why forming new habits can be difficult then, because as you say, if you go for a run and you've never ran before, or you haven't in years, and you feel terrible afterwards, that's not going to be really a positive emotion.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we know that if you continue with that and you stay focused and committed to it, that you will eventually feel a positive emotion afterwards, and you'll see the benefit, whether you start to lose weight or you can start to not be out of breath after climbing stairs. But it's not instant, so I can see there instantly how you have a bit of an issue with that.
Yeah.
Third principle.
So making it satisfying. So this again feeds into the reward pathway a little bit, where again the inverted is making it unsatisfying. So one of the biggest things we use there is food journaling, or just the first step for most people is being conscious and aware of things. So like we said, just take really easy examples. You eat some chocolate, immediately like your dopamine sensors light up and think, oh, that's positive, this feels really good, this is a nice taste. And so the short-term effect, like you say, is really good. So you get instant gratification, which is powerful for people, because it builds that little feedback loop of let's do this again and again and again. So the longer term thing comes with, especially people who feel guilt around food, which is pretty strong. There's a place further down the line where they've done a little bit of overeating or over-consuming on some foods, and the feelings of guilt, shame sometimes comes into it, disappointment in themselves. Perfectly normal to feel those, but essentially we're not taking stock of that at the time. We're almost kind of using something else to distract ourselves. So one of the things we use with people to make certain behaviors seem unsatisfying is like journaling. So if there's an instance where someone skips the gym, basically writing down some notes about how they feel in terms of, does it make them feel more energized, less energized, and just kind of getting positive feedback from that basically. So making something seem rewarding on the other side of it is a big, massive thing for keeping habits consistent, and then also making your, let's just call them negative or less healthy behaviors seem unsatisfying, which they often are if we're eating poorly or not exercising on a regular basis. We tend to feel those emotions, and just basically looking at those, recording them, noticing how you feel, as opposed to kind of pushing them off to the side is probably a big aspect of that as well.
Yeah, I think that does make sense, and I think it's the case with a lot of things, is that it starts with awareness, right? Because once you are aware of your habits and how you approach life, I think it's easy to assume that everybody feels that way and everybody is self-aware, but actually remember what you were like when you were younger. You don't really know why you're necessarily doing things, or why you're going to pick up biscuits, or you're not training or looking after your health and things like that. And I guess once you do start to become aware, you start to journal, you can start to see that, oh, actually this is a really negative behaviour this is going to lead to this, you know,
Mm-hmm.
negative action down the line, and now actually I feel more invested in you know, changing that.
Yeah.
So you know, that makes sense.
Totally.
And one more principle.
Yeah, so that's just making it easy, and that's kind of similar to the obvious aspects. Obvious, we need to think of it a little bit more as kind of reminders.
Mhm.
So, you know, like placing things within reach
Yep.
is the obvious aspect, to make sure that you kind of remember. So bringing your gym bag to work so that you can go straight there rather than going home and kind of getting distracted with other things. That's more the obvious approach. The easy stuff is kind of removing barriers, like we said.
Mhm.
So I think one of the things maybe in January in particular, when we have a lot of people going back into things full steam ahead, and we'll kind of talk about the all or nothing approach further down the line, but is kind of making themselves feel like they have to do something that's beyond themselves. So maybe they feel like they have to go running because it's obviously like a really obvious one for people. Maybe people don't like running, or maybe it's really challenging for them. So there's a barrier in between them and starting running. So making it easy, like this feeds into the enjoyment aspect.
Mhm.
For me, I know that running is certainly a tool that is much easier for me than some of the training I used to do. So if I had a choice between running and, you know, doing a session with weights, and I'm really tight for time and I just need something easy, I'm probably going to pick running most of the time, because there's not the element of having to transport myself to a gym facility, do a little bit of warm up and make sure that I'm mobile and safe to move ahead with the workout. Then there's choosing certain exercises. You know, there's a million different steps between that workout with weights and the kind of safety that you need to approach that with. But the ease of just putting my running shoes on, going out 20 or 30 minutes, I know I'll feel much better on the other side of that. That's really important for people who are struggling to kind of get past those hurdles initially. Flip side of that, like we talked about, the kind of the obvious, if food is in plain sight, it's just going to be eaten. That certainly applies to me anyway. And again, the barriers between easy access to food or whatever your activity is, whatever you're trying to stop, just make sure it's not as easy for you to grasp. So stop keeping things in the house that you know you're going to eat more frequently. Set the barrier between you and that negative behavior that you want to pursue.
Cool. So I think, you know, off the back of that, you're talking about sort of almost a personal example for you with weights and running, and thinking why that's a really good option for you, and they're all really great positive reasons. I guess it's maybe important to know and to discuss that is the case, but I guess that's not the case for everybody, right? And you kind of tied into it, don't you, that you've got to find something that you enjoy, something that's fun for you, that you get benefit from. You don't want to necessarily be forcing yourself to go running every single day because you think that's what you should do, or that's what somebody on Instagram has told you to do. So does that sort of tie back into maybe what somebody's why is, and the reasons why they're trying to form these habits in the first place?
Massively, yeah. So that's we're going deep on that there. So that's probably somewhere we should have started with, is the habits and the why. And something we're massive on is making sure that people have kind of the right fuel for setting out on the journey, is what we've talked about. And oftentimes, especially in the January phase, there's a huge amount of like social norms of like, right, this is when we'll all start exercising and drinking a little bit less. So yeah, I think starting off with an understanding of yourself and the reasons that you want to get in shape or change these habits, because it can be different for everyone, and that is a crucial aspect of that. And one of the questions we ask people is, how is your life going to change or improve or benefit from pursuing this endeavor in some way? And that really gets people thinking. So really good point to raise.
That's quite good, because I think a lot of people maybe have specific goals in mind that they want to change habits for, and then you ask them that question, well, why do you want to do that? Is that going to enhance your life, 5 years down the line? And you're like, actually probably not. That's not going to, but this other goal that's maybe more health related, or related to how you can do other things better in your life, sort of
completely.
Changes, doesn't it? It changes this perspective.
Absolutely. And the last point on that I would say is that I sometimes get really frustrated by the industry, you know this, but there's a massive if we look at health, wellness, fitness, they're very different things, and the fitness industry in itself is very extreme, and like we've talked about, the more motivation patterns, fitness is very towards so it's pursuing something better, a PB, a faster time, a bigger lift, strength stuff. It's all about improving and pursuing something further away from you, which is great, and some people are motivated by that. Healthcare, on the other hand, is more of an avoidance mindset, where it's let's stay injury free, let's stay free from sickness, free from metabolic disease and things like that, and let's just get you to the point that's slightly beyond there.
Yeah.
So it's not to say that one's right or wrong, but people are going to be on very different ends of the spectrum with regards to what they want. Are they exercising to avoid mental burnout, obesity, cardiac issues, things like that? Or are they exercising because they really want to be 8% body fat rather than 10% body fat, or they want to run faster, lift heavier, those kind of things? So just remembering the person that's in front of you, and remembering that there's not a right or wrong, but it's you as the individual decides what's important
what's
to you.
right for you. And I guess a lot of those things you're talking about, hitting a back squat PB or being 10% body fat, those are like the finer details that are at the very, very end. Like the big important thing that we need to focus on, no matter what makes you happy and what your goals are, or what sport you play, is that underlying health, isn't it? Is being able to live for longer, hopefully, live, a happy life because you're able to do the things you want to do, not experiencing disease and things like that, and not being in pain. I think is a big one that we focus on with a lot of our clients as well. So health is that underlying base, and then it's up to you what
how far you want to
go with things, and what excites you, and what hobbies and things and interests you have, and fitness after that.
I think we call it like a kind of health is a life that's free from restriction, right? So if someone asks you to go do an activity, you might not be like a world champion in it, but at least you can say yes to doing that thing. That for me is kind of the baseline of health.
It's important to say yes to those opportunities when you get them, if you want to be able to do them. Nice. So I guess to wrap up then, do we have a few maybe highlight points, or just a highlight tips and tricks and things to take away? Okay, if I'm going to go now and try and build these new healthier habits that are going to enhance my health and my life, I'm maybe struggling already, or maybe I'm doing great, it's a few weeks into January, but what can I do right now, or what should I focus on? Top couple of things. So
the biggest problem that we see, and when we highlight this for people that we're talking to in our kind of initial contacts with people, is the sort of all or nothing approach. And this is where people kind of get this spurt of motivation, they go all in for a week, and then it's back down, and then they're like, right, I need to get out of this slump again, pushing all the way back up, and it's this kind of roller coaster. And when you lay it out for people like that, they're like, that sounds like me. And we're like, okay, what's the problem here? And the problem generally comes from those slumps in motivation going a little lower every time, and having to feel like you have to push extra effort in. And I think this just comes from, again, viewing things on a short-term basis. It's like, okay, I need this next 4 to 6 weeks to go well, or I've got this 12-week transformation that I've signed up for. And it comes on a very short term. It's like, okay, I need to dial in every single aspect of my sleep, nutrition, exercise plans. It all needs to be 100%, or it's worthless and pointless. And it kind of leads to that binge eating mentality and that kind of over exertion with exercise. So I think the number one thing that we always say with habits is start small. And if you think about the book Atomic Habits, like an atom is tiny and immeasurable, but when you stack them all up, they make something very powerful. So the way I phrase this to people in the consult is the low-hanging fruit question. Like, what's the 1 or 2 things that we could change right now that you could probably do for the next 2 or 3 years without getting fed up of it? And then let's just start doing those on a consistent basis.
I think that's important what you said. There's something that you can do for the next 2 to 3 years. It's not something that you can do for the next 6 weeks and absolutely hate and then fall off the wagon with later on, because it's probably the wrong sort of thing you're trying to do there.
The more effort a task requires, the less sustainable it is generally, I would say.
Anything else?
So the next piece that we're probably going to looking at with people is tracking things, right? So I'm talking about it today in the talk, but the O-Power study is like one of the most impressive examples, and that's in the book How to Change by Katie Milkman. So this O-Power study, it was basically a bunch of homes in an area. Half of them got energy bill reports to say, oh, you're using this much compared to your neighbor. And the ones who received those reports dropped their energy bills every single month, as they were getting these reports. So they had a social norm, basically a value to compare people against, and they had monthly reminders of, oh, check your energy, keep saving, all this kind of thing. This went on for 2 years, and people were able to reduce their energy expenditure in their homes pretty drastically. After the 2-year period, half of the people stopped receiving those energy reports, and their usage started to climb again by 10-20% every month. So you think about that, what does that say? That says after 2 years of maintaining a habit, you might slip up or resort to that old behavior again. So that's where tracking becomes really, really important, because these things, like we say, even over 2 years of maintaining a habit, it can flip back if we don't kind of consistently keep working on it. The second point is going back to that gratification thing that we talked about, right? So some of the least healthy habits that we've got give us instant gratification with a powerful surge of dopamine and a good reward feeling from that. I've heard it referred to like when you eat a salad or go to the gym once, your abs don't suddenly pop out of your body, so you're like, why should I do this? Why should I keep going with this? So something as simple as like a habit tracker, a calendar, for example, like shading in or crossing a day when you've exercised and eaten healthy, that can be really, really helpful. The other example is like a coin jar. You keep a jar there every time you take an action that's positive or healthy in your mind, add a coin to the jar, and suddenly it starts to fill up, and then at the end of that, you have a jar full of coins. You can go and spend it on something that makes you feel good or happy. So you've got tracking and visualizing progress over a long term, and you've got a reward system built into that at the end. So that's probably one of the best tools that we can use for that approach.
Nice, I like that, getting that positive affirmation in a different way. And I guess a big part of it there is there's just accountability built into that, isn't there? But it's self-accountability, which I think is really important, and we talk about that a lot with our clients, is that we don't want them to be with us forever. I think there are a lot of companies that would disagree with that, and they're trying to hold on to clients because it's an income generator, but we actually want to make our clients free one day. We want them to be able to make their own choices, to go off on their own, to not have to rely on somebody else, and just to be accountable, because we're not going to be there forever. So it's just about educating them, isn't it, and allowing them to.
And how do we do that best? How do we get people to be self-accountable? Where does that come from?
I guess it comes from my experience in a way. It comes from us providing them with that knowledge, but then it's them making that decision on their own. I think it's a big part of, whenever, or me personally, when I deal with clients, I'll provide them options, or I'll provide them the knowledge, or this happen, or this will happen, but it's entirely up to you what you want to do with that. And so once they've taken that in and they make that decision themselves, they've had to go through that thought process. They've had to take it in. They've had to think about it, think about the pros and cons, and then make that decision themselves, rather than me saying, okay, you need to do this, and then just being reliant on me for that. So I think experience in doing that over time, it's not an easy thing. We can't just expect people to give them all the tools in 1 month and then to suddenly be reliant on themselves for the rest of life. And even us, as coaches, and the way that we approach things, I slip up still. I know you mentioned that earlier, that you kind of jump on and off with it. After 2 years of sustaining a habit and suddenly you go back to your old ways, I think that's natural. I think that the big thing to remember with that is that it's okay, but also, we can't let that continue for too long, because it makes it harder to jump back onto it, right? So I guess it's going back to the why you're doing something, remembering that, and just having that little bit of self-accountability definitely helps. Yeah,
you got that there in the end. Like I was trying to tease that out of you a little bit, of like, where does the self-accountability come from? And it comes from people's own internal drives, whether that's the like poor health avoidance mindset or the aspiring to something better mindset, is really down to the individual, but it's got to come from their own personal drive, and that's why we try to be so hands-off with our coaching in a lot of ways, and not being like there to hold people's hands through it is another strategy that can be used. And I don't personally agree with this one, because I think it's a bit of a short-term tool, but an accountability hack is like a forgetting the term for it, but like a cash promise, right? Or an accountability tool, like a friend to go training with, a coach to be there when you say meet me here at 6 o'clock. Those things are great in the short term for maybe starting a habit, but the problem is long term, like you say,
being reliant on
you become reliant on it, and then you don't necessarily have your own motivations to exercise, eat healthy, get to sleep on time, manage stress. So having a real internal sense of why health is so important to you is probably the bedrock of most things, and we'll probably cover that in future episodes, right?
Yeah, awesome. Any other final thoughts or anything you wanted to add before we close it up then?
I'm big on summaries, so if we can summarize things as easily as possible and wrap that all into a conversation, it's start to understand your own motivations a little bit better.
So your why.
Yeah, understand your why. Think about steps on the smallest yet longest term scale. So the smallest behaviors that you can do on the longest term timeline.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, that's probably about it.
It's a good starting block. And
less
that's
is
like
more.
you say, the thing is that if you take that away now and you deeply think about what is your why, why am I doing this, or why do I want to create these habits?
Yeah.
You've got that nice deep-rooted connection to that, which is going to help you hopefully be more successful.
Sure.
And then, like you say, we're talking about the smallest, lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah.
It's something that you can do for 2 to 5 years plus, something for the rest of your life, really.
Yeah.
Ideally, if you do those two things consistently, you're going to really start forming some good positive habits, right?
Yeah, completely. And it builds momentum, which is powerful for people.
Yes. Getting started is the hard bit.
Yeah.
And we've all experienced that, I guess, at some point, and we've all failed at some point, which is fine, but using those two tips, definitely higher chance of being successful.
Completely. Yeah.
Awesome. Alright guys, well I think we'll wrap that up. That was our first sort of short podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do have any questions about that, feel free to get in touch with us. You can leave a comment. You can get in touch at VRTU_health on Instagram. It's probably the best platform. We do also have the website. But yeah, if there's anything you'd like to hear us talk about, then do get in touch, and we'll hopefully see you in the next one.